I don't have a problem if you're a Catholic, Protestant, Muslim, Jew, pagan, atheist. That's your own business, what you do. Like your sex life, it's your own business. What I am bothered about is when you impose your prejudice upon people like me based on your programming, and that's when it's wrong. Other than that, freedom, all the way in terms of religious freedom. In that video, I made a comment about that the waters to particularly the Reformed version of Catholicism, the Presbyterians, the Protestants, see them as water coming from hell. That's because of all the Christian religions, the most Abrahamic in its nature is the King James Bible Presbyterianism. It's purely Second Temple rabbinical Judaism, and rather than having Jesus as a kind of a Buddha, or I don't have a problem with the idea of Jesus being seen in a kind of a spiritual light. The problem is that with the King James Presbyterians, they reduce him back to what he really is, Rabbi Yeshuva, pushing, the King James Bible is absolutely an abridged version of the Babylonian Talmud. That's why it was created. They wanted to make Catholicism less pagan. Regarding the waters from hell, this tells us a lot psychologically about this Second Temple rabbinical Presbyterianism and its relationship with nature. The Catholics are much better. I'm not because I was raised Catholic. I can't stand the Pope and the Vatican and all that shite. But I'm just saying for facts here. The Abrahamics, in their purest form, have a difficulty with nature. Why? Because they were thrown out of paradise. Adam and Eve were kicked out of paradise for being amongst and being close to nature. They ate the forbidden fruit. They listened to the serpent. These are all, pagan archetypes. And they were cast out of paradise into the wilderness of the Middle East, into the land of sand and lizard and goat, where there was a sense of being expelled. And this neuroses has been carried on forever. You have, Jesus defied the sanctity of water by walking on water. We know that probably didn't happen. Probably wasn't, to Jesus, basically a very clever archetype put together brilliantly by the Romans. And it's almost certainly based on some other previous story. But anyway, he walks on water. He doesn't immerse himself in water. And you have John the Baptist who baptizes by water, but he is not the Messiah. He is the Messiah is beyond water. And this is the idea of the nature thing. And this comes from being a desert people, being locked away from nature, where there is no nature. And that's not to say they didn't have farming, and they did have farming and things like that. But remember, farming and agriculture is a kind of a war with nature. You talk to any farmer anywhere in the world, particularly in a country like Ireland, it's a constant battle against weeds, natural diseases, weather, elements. It's a this is why Christianity, Presbyterianism, is so strong among farming communities like the Amish and the Plymouth Brethrens and the Calvinists, the most extreme Abrahamic Presbyterians. They're at war with nature because God is punishing them for casting them out of paradise. And this is so different than the relationship that the pagan has with the natural world. We live on Gaia. This is Mother Earth. The beautiful country I live in is named after Goddess Hera. This is a sacred well to us is more than just healing waters from the earth. It is the cervix of the Mother Goddess. That's her fluid of life. The same water that comes from the earth is the same water that sustains humans and mammals and animals when we're in the womb or in the egg sac. It's the same. It's considered as above, so below. The same representation in another form. And this was also a problem for the Puritans. I'll call them from now on. The Puritans, this is idolatry. Idolatry. And this is why they don't even have things like baptisms and things like this, even though, because it's not mentioned in the Old Testament. This is what they were really after. They go back to the pure Second Temple rabbinical Judaism. And as you know, Lucifer is a pagan god that was mistranslated in the Hebrew Bible, and every scholar of even biblical scholars and every A Hebrew scholar of note will tell you that the King James Bible made a mistake, and there is not Lucifer. It was a mistake. Lucifer is a pagan god, the god of light, and that's because it was very easy to transpose this. And you have these theosophists in the truth movement and all over who play on. This is why I don't trust these theosophists and these Manly P. Hall types and Blavatsky types, because they're enforcing the rabbinical Lucifer, the Second Temple Puritan rabbinical Presbyterian Lucifer, which is a complete fallacy. They're not, and they're in denial of the classical pagan god, because that's Christianity, theosophy and all. That's just another form of Christianity. Now, the battle with nature continues into the present with the whole climate change thing. Remember, look how they think about nature, right? There's humans, and then there's nature, and we are not part of nature. Where do the climate change fanatics get that from? We've been cast out of paradise. You see, it continues. This is why this religious stuff is so dangerous. It can be transferred into secular life as well. So we've been cast out of paradise. Now, we have a problem if there's too much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. What's the obvious answer? How would a pagan address that? Forests. Pagans would be planting trees. Hindus would be planting trees. Taoists would be planting trees. How do the ones who have been cast out of paradise deal with it? Through penance, through punishment, divine punishment, carbon taxes, restrictions, curfews, punishment, the wrath of the God, the wrath of the Lord. A Calvinist mentality, very much a Calvinist mentality. And you see it, Calvinist change it should be called, more climate change. And that's just, again, a disconnect from nature. And this is, you can see that, and so clearly, the relationship is not, they don't know anything about nature. They watch David Attenborough documentaries and think they have a relationship with nature. They watch the Discovery Channel, the BBC. They don't actually involve themselves with nature. Most of these climate change scientists don't even own a pair of hiking boots. They sit in labs doing experiments and building machines to punish us. And these are the modern version of the witchfinder's tools to see if we're sinners. We're sinners against, the idea of being cast out of nature, cast out of paradise, like their ancestors, their spiritual ancestors, Adam and Eve. The pagan has not been cast out of paradise, and neither has the Hindu. So therefore, we feel strongly, if this planet was, this is why real pagans, and I'm not talking about Wiccans and things like that, and these cosplay druids standing on the side of a hill with a staff and a boner. I'm talking about real pagans. Have an instinctual sense inside them that this planet is not in danger, because if it was, we would be the first to rally to the cause. Even years ago, the reason why they still have pollution, massive pollution in America and in China, is because of, in America, it's a Presbyterian culture that doesn't care for nature. I'm not saying all Americans, I'm just saying that's where the culture comes from, with the corporate polluters. And on China, communists, Marxists, Maoists. And this is where that comes from, this disconnect from nature. So that's a very interesting thing to think about, is the relationship that the hardcore puritanical Christians have with nature. They see themselves as being God's personal creation and outside of nature, and that has transposed into secular life in terms of things like how climate change is dealt with. Rather than having a natural approach, rather than planting forests, they will build machines. Rather than have a more ethical way of farming and treating cattle particularly more humanely, and this is the reason why I still eat wild game, fish, and free-range eggs, but I've stopped eating meat, pork and beef and chicken. It comes from a place where there's very little nature apart from the desert. And you think about that, the barren landscape of the environment will always be reflected in the soul. Also, the lushness of the landscape will also be reflected in the soul. We have to, without being bigoted, very important, to decouple our consciousness and ultimately our psyche and our soul. Remember, psyche is the Greek word for soul, from that. That may work in that environment, but we cannot impose it on ourselves, and we certainly cannot impose it on the planet. And you take care of yourselves. Bye bye.